going on, guys? Great Disciple back with another video, and we are going to continue our journey in the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, sometimes the best way to move forward is to look back, and that's what we're going to do with Solomon. You know, if we go back to Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 12, it says, "I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem." And then we pair that up with the first chapter and the first verse where it says, "The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem." Now, preacher and teacher come from the same word, koheleth. Now, Solomon was king and his father David was also king, and he's on a journey in the book of Ecclesiastes. If you go back to verse 12, it says, "And I set my mind to seek and explore the wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven." Well, Solomon's story starts in 1 Kings chapter 1 through 3. Okay, that's where he begins his reign on the throne after David had died. But the real story of Solomon starts with David. If we go back to 2 Samuel, there's a story, a very famous story that many of you probably know, and it's the story of David and Bathsheba. I'm going to give you a quick overview. All the men had left Israel to go off to war, but David decided he would hang back, which was a huge mistake because we are supposed to lead, we are supposed to work, and when we have idle hands, we tend to get ourselves into trouble. Well, one night, David's not asleep. He goes up on the roof of his castle and he looks out and he sees a woman, Bathsheba, bathing, and she is beautiful to say the least. And he calls one of his servants and says, "Who is that woman?" And the servant says, "Isn't that Uzziah's wife, Bathsheba?" Meaning that this is a married woman, stay away. David ignores it, tells the servant to go get that woman. She comes to the castle and he takes her to bed. And he thinks that that's it. He acted out on his lust. Well, she gets pregnant. And now David's in trouble because now he's got to cover his sin, just like most of us try to do. We try to cover our sin. And so what he does was he calls her husband in from the war to come back and quote unquote give him a report. His goal is that when he comes in from war, he'll lay with his wife and that'll be the covering of his sin. But this man is more honorable than David, and he decides to sleep outside on the ground because if his men are off at war fighting, what right does he have to lay with his wife? So David finds out that night that he didn't lay with his wife. So the next day, David brings the man to his castle and gets him drunk, thinking that if I get this guy drunk, he'll rest on his morals and he'll go and he'll make love to his wife and she'll be pregnant and so on and so forth. But this man, even in his drunken state, was more honorable than David. So now David has an issue. Now she's pregnant. And this guy won't have sex with his wife because he's honorable. So he writes a letter to the commanding general Joab and says, "Put him where the fighting is the fiercest. And when the enemy advances, draw your men back so he'll be slain in battle." And so this man takes his message of death to his commander and he's killed in battle. And after Bathsheba had gone through the mourning period, David takes Bathsheba as his wife. She gives birth to a child. Now, as a punishment for what David did, this child dies within days. I think 7 days is what it is. And of course, David's distraught over it, but he understands the will of God. And so they have a second child, and that child is Solomon. And that's where Solomon comes from, you guys. That's his lineage. So it was around the age of 20 that Solomon takes the throne. And if you read 1 Kings, you know, he starts off really good. All right, he takes the throne, and there's a story, and probably the main story that a lot of people know about Solomon is the story of where God comes to Solomon and says, "Ask anything that you want of me and I'll give it to you." And Solomon thinks about it and he says, "Lord, I pray for wisdom and discernment that I may lead your people." And God, being so moved by Solomon's heart, says, "Not only am I going to give you all the wisdom in the world, but I'm going to give you all the wealth and victory and peace that no king has ever seen before because of what you asked." And so this is all bestowed upon Solomon. So what does Solomon do with it? Well, he starts off really strong and he builds the temple of God, but then his heart shifts. And I'm going to tell you why his heart shifts. And what you do is you got to go back to Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 14. And I'm going to read you a little bit of it. This was what God said to the Israelites concerning kings. He says, "When you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, and you possess it and live in it, you will say, I will set a king over me like all the nations who are around me. And you shall surely set a king over you whom the Lord your God chooses, one from among your countrymen you shall set as king for yourselves. And you may not put a foreigner over yourselves who is not your countryman. Moreover, and here are 3 rules that God gave to the kings. Moreover, he shall not multiply horses for himself, nor shall he cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never again return that way. Number 2, he shall not multiply wives for himself, or else his heart will turn away. And number 3, nor shall he greatly increase in silver and gold for himself. And what is the command that God gave to the king? Well, that's in verse 18. He says, now it shall come about when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself a copy of this law, meaning the Bible, on a scroll in the presence of the Levitical priest. And it shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life. And why is this? So that number 1, he may learn to fear the Lord his God by carefully observing all the words of this law and these statutes. And number 2, that his heart may not be lifted up above his countrymen, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment to the right or the left, so that his sons may continue long in his kingdom in the midst of Israel. So the 3 commandments, all right, did you hear them? The first one was, do not multiply horses. Well, why is that? Well, back in those times, horses were used to draw chariots. And it was known that the army that had the most chariots would have a greater likelihood of victory. Well, God said, I don't want you to have horses. I don't want you to have chariots, because I want you to understand that victory comes from me, not from man. Number 2, God said, do not marry multiple wives, also foreign wives. Why? Because wives will turn your heart from God. And number 3, do not gather gold and silver. In other words, do not use this office, the kingship, as a way to enrich yourself. That's not what it was intended for. And what was the command? The command was that you would write the word of the law on a scroll, and you will study it all the days of your life to remember to A, fear the Lord, and B, understand that even though you're king, you are no better than any other man. Okay, so what do we do with this? Well, we know that Solomon was given all the wisdom in the world, okay? But there's something that many people forget. Wisdom does not equal obedience. There's a great verse in the Bible. In James 1:22, it says, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourself. Do what it says. It means not anything to know the entire book of the law if you do not practice it in your heart and in your actions. It is meaningless. It is futility. Okay? So here's what we're going to do. I know that I did most of chapter 1 on the last episode, but I'm going to show you 3 sections of pursuit of man. I'm going to break them down for you. The first one is we go from chapter 1 verses 12 through 18, and that shows the emptiness of man's wisdom. In chapter 2 verses 1 through 17, I'm going to show you the emptiness of pleasure and accomplishments. In chapter 2 verses 18 through 23, I'm going to show you the emptiness of a life of hard work. And then I'm going to show you the solution to all of this, and that's in chapter 2 verses 24 through 26. All right? So here we go. The emptiness of wisdom. All right, we're going to go to verse 12 in chapter 1. I'm going to read it to you, and we're going to talk about it a little bit, okay? So, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. Under heaven is equal to under the sun, and I talked about that before and last week. Basically what it's saying is the wisdom of man. It's when we look at life as if this is the only one there is. It's a secular viewpoint. Secular teaches us that, you guys have heard the term the secular government, secular schools. It's when we remove God from everything. It is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of man to be afflicted with. All right, verse 14. I have seen all the works which have been done under the sun. As you can see, under the sun pairs up with under heaven. And behold, all is vanity and striving after the wind. All is futility. Here's a secular viewpoint right here. If you don't have God, if you think that this is all there is, in your life you get one shot. And so in this lifetime, you do everything you can to gather everything that you possibly want, all the pleasures, all the wisdom, all the intellectual pursuit and the material gains, because this is it. This is all you got. And when you're dead, it's gone. It's over. See, a secular viewpoint, life without God, does not hold to anything greater than. All right? Let's go to verse 15. I love this verse. This is an amazing verse if you guys really want to learn something. Let me read it to you. It says, "What is crooked cannot be straightened, and what is lacking cannot be counted." So what do we mean by crooked? It means that we're all born screwed up. Okay? There's a sin nature, and there are things in your life which are broken that you cannot fix. Okay? The only way to fix it is with God. And what's lacking? Life just doesn't add up without God. There's frustration if you choose to live without Him, a quote-unquote life under the sun. Let me continue on reading. "I said to myself, behold, I have magnified and increased wisdom more than all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my mind has observed a wealth of wisdom and knowledge." Verse 17. "And I set my mind to know wisdom, to know madness and folly, and I realize that this also is striving after the wind, because in much wisdom there is much grief, and increasing knowledge results in increasing pain." So what does that mean? It's like this. It's like Solomon is trying to get a PhD in philosophy. All right, he's trying to find wisdom without the fear of the Lord. If you go to Proverbs 1:7, it says this: "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." So without God, there is no wisdom. You think about all the famous philosophers who had lived, all the quote-unquote geniuses that we call geniuses. You go to Barnes & Noble and you see their pictures all over the wall, right? How many of them killed themselves? In fact, I'm not even going to answer that to you. You go check it out. I mean, Ernest Hemingway blew himself up with a shotgun. Who's that famous lady, that writer? She filled up her jacket with rocks and jumped into the ocean and drowned herself. I mean, story after story of these men who tried to seek wisdom from a human perspective, and it all ended in suicide. Yet we consider them geniuses. It's amazing. The futility and the emptiness of human wisdom. All right, chapter 2, verses 1 through 17, the emptiness of pleasure. Let's go. "I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure," from the world's perspective, by the way. "So enjoy yourself. And behold, it too was futility. I said of laughter, it is madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine, while my mind was guiding me wisely, and how to take hold of folly." Folly is another word for disobedience. "And until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under heaven for the few years of their life." You know, a lot of people think that pleasure equates to sin, but it's actually the furthest thing from the truth. See, all pleasure is from God. There's a great verse on this in Psalms chapter 16, verse 11. It says, "You will make known to me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy. In your right hand there are pleasures forever." Now, what Solomon's speaking of in chapter 2, in the beginning, the pleasures are the pleasures that are under the sun. You know, he's talking about, anything that you can drink, shoot up, eat, consume, anything at all. He withheld nothing from him, and in the end it was all futility. Okay? That's the pleasure. He's talking about humanly secular pleasure. In verse 4, we're going to talk about accomplishments. Accomplishments, i.e. projects. See, people can get intoxicated with projects. You know, it can get out of control. And let's look at Solomon's life here. He says, "I enlarged my works. I built houses," not a house, houses for myself. "I planted vineyards for myself." You ever notice how when people get really, really wealthy, the first thing they want to do is buy a winery? Well, Solomon had so much money, he could have bought France. "I made gardens and parks for myself." Now, these aren't just little parks. These are Central Park. And gardens, you see those lavish estates in the United Kingdom around those castles. That's nothing to what Solomon created. I planted them all kinds of fruit trees. You know, Solomon was the only king in Israel to send out ships all over the world and gather livestock and seeds, and he would plant these trees and these vineyards all over the land. I made ponds of water for myself from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. I mean, this guy created an irrigation system just to take care of what he created. I bought male and female slaves, and I had homeborn slaves. I possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. Also, I collected for myself silver and gold and the treasures of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers. See, he didn't just buy the CD, he bought the band. And the pleasures of men, many concubines. Many concubines? This man had 700 wives and 300 concubines. I mean, this guy had Viagra and Cialis on tap. And then in verse 9 it says, Then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. All that my eyes desire, I did not refuse him. There was nothing that he saw that he said no to. Excess was his best friend. Anything his heart's desired, he bought. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. Drugs, sex, and rock and roll, my friends. For my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. Verse 11, Thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was emptiness, a striving after the wind, and there was no profit under the sun. So what was the result of all that he had done? Let's go ahead, let's get forward to verse 17. So I hated my life. Think about that. Everything that he wanted to his heart's desire, he pursued. Drugs, sex, and rock and roll. He bought anything. He built everything. Anything his heart desired. And at the end, he hated his life. So I hated life, for the work which had been done under the sun was grievous to me, because everything is futility in striving after the wind. And again in verse 18, Thus I hated all the fruit of my labor. Shocking, right? So chapter 2, verse 18 through 23 begins the emptiness of a life of hard work. Now let me just say this before we go in. We are men. We are commanded to work. We are commanded to take care of our families. Colossians 3:23. Our work is for the Lord, not for man. We use the gifts that God gave us to carry out the duties that he had purposed for us in the beginning. And every man's work is just as important as another man's. Okay, so don't take this the wrong way. Verses 18 through 19. Basically, it says that you may be wise, but you can't take it with you when you die. Okay? Let me read it to you. Thus I hated all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun, for I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool, yet he will have control over all the fruit of my labor for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun. This too is vanity, meaning that all the gathering that you do in your life of these possessions, all the work that you do to fulfillment, it's all going to be for naught in the end. So don't put the meaning of your life behind the work that you do, because it too is vanity. It's futility. In verse 21 through 23, it's just saying that work is not the fulfillment of your life. Let me read it to you real quick. It says, When there is a man who has labored with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, then he gives his legacy to one who has not labored with them. This too is vanity or emptiness and a great evil. For what does a man get in all his labor and in all of his striving with which he labors under the sun? Verse 23, Because all his days his task is painful and grievous. Even at night his mind does not rest. This too is vanity. You think about that, you working men, you guys trying to pay bills, trying to take care of your family. At night, anxiety overtakes you. You pace around. You can't go to sleep because you're so worried, and you just think that this work is the meaning of your life and that's the path. Well, it's not. It's futility. So what's the solution to all this? The solution is chapter 2, verses 24 through 26. Here it is, you guys. Let's get some comfort from the Word of God here. There is nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. Watch this. This also I have seen, that it is from the hand of God. It's a gift, you guys. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? For to a person who is good in his sight, he has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. While to the sinner, he has given the task of gathering and collecting, so that he may give to the one who is good in God's sight. This too is vanity, is striving after the wind. Let me break that down. For the one who follows God, life over the sun, not under the sun, it is a gift. See, if you don't build your life on Jesus Christ, your life will be vanity. It will be empty. There will be no meaning to it. There's a verse, unless the Lord builds the house, you labor in vain. In verse 25, there is no enjoyment in life without Him, without God, that lasts. You can find pleasures under the sun, but none of them will last. None of them will fulfill your life. Go back to Psalm 16:11 in verse 26. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. And for a verse of reference, go to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6. You guys, I'm going to stop there. This was a little bit longer one. I hope you got something out of it. I pray that you did. You guys have an awesome day. Any questions, put them down below. In His name, I pray, Jesus Christ. Amen. Have a good one.